Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. I want to pick up some issues of security. We've heard for the last hour discussions of security, and there are many different aspects to the question of security. Are we secure in this world in which we live? Well, there's a lot of problems. To be sure, we can worry about China and the South China Sea, and we do, and certainly the Middle East, where I recently visited the Gulf states, and Iran. A lot of concerns there. And as you move into Iraq, the issue of ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and of course the great tragedy that's occurring in Syria, where basically cities are simply being destroyed. Obviously the churches, the monasteries, the mosques, boom, housing, and well over 270,000 people, Christians, Muslims, others, killed in the Syrian civil war and the resultant desire by people to get out of there, and immigration issues are abounding. Certainly they affect us here in the United States. There are many other security issues beyond those that make the headlines. The security issues in our homes. For example, do we have a job? Well, that's a big issue, and often here on the floor in days gone by, I would stand with my colleagues and we would talk about creating jobs in the United States. We talk about strategies of making it in America, strategies to use our tax dollars to buy American-made products and services so that our money could be used to employ our own people and to support our own businesses. These are all very, very important strategies. They do have to do with individual security, community security, and family security. So security has many, many pieces. Tonight, I want to talk about one type of security. And this is something that every human being, every animal, large or small, from an elephant to the smallest mouse, this security issue is one that affects every form of life. It's called water. It's called water. This is the most basic of security issues. You don't go but a day or two, maybe 3 days if you're not doing much and it's really not very hot, without water. It is essential. This is a bottom-line security issue. You don't have water, you are insecure, and you don't have water, you'll very soon be dead. And if you have poisonous water, you may not die immediately, but it'll certainly affect you. Let's take a look at this. This is water from Flint, Michigan, United States of America. Roughly 100,000 human beings in Flint, Michigan, and among the most essential of all of the things we need for life, for security, is water. And that is Flint, Michigan water, a city of 100,000 people in the United States. Oh, we like to think of ourselves as being the most advanced place in the world. That's Flint, Michigan water. 9,000 children under the age of 4 or 5 have been drinking that water, contaminated with lead, for about 14 months. I'm not going to go into the reasons why that tragedy is occurring. And there are many, and there ought to be, and there is an FBI investigation. And there's questions about the governor of Michigan and the way in which it was done, but I'm not going to go there today. I want to go to something else that we're responsible for here in the House of Representatives and our colleagues across the Capitol in the U.S. Senate. I want to talk about our responsibility here, because this is our business. if we're concerned about security, and we are, we should and we do talk about al-Qaeda. We should and we do talk about ISIS. And we should and we do talk about refugees and whether they're safe or not. And we talk about San Bernardino and the great tragedy there. And we should talk about it. And we should do something about it. There's another side of security that we have specific responsibility to deal with. In 1974, we set out to clean up the waters of the United States with the Clean Water Act. Over the years, it's been amended. In 1996, we set standards for clean water, and we provided some funding. So, if someone were to grade us on our success in addressing one of the fundamental security issues, that is the ability to have clean, drinkable water, here's the scorecard. Let's take a look at it. Let's see, we can run down through aviation, bridges. Oh, by the way, this is from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and they produce a scorecard on how well this great nation, the United States of America, is doing on providing fundamental security. Aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water. D. Today, at a hearing on water, the Society of Civil Engineers said, we got a D on drinking water. Somebody asked them, is that the bottom grade? And they said, well, pretty much, because if you go to an F, it's too much paperwork. So they just stop at D. D. We fancy ourselves to be the greatest place in the world, the most advanced economy. All the way down this list, D's, a couple of C's. Our infrastructure doesn't rank among the best in the world. In fact, we rank about where developing countries are. So what's the result of all of this? Well, Flint, Michigan water, would you drink it? 100,000 people in Flint, Michigan, that's their water supply. And without water, you don't live. Closer to my home, Porterville, California, a city of a few tens of thousands of people. No water. So they truck it in. I've got one of those on my ranch. It's called a livestock water trough. So that's where the kids get their water in the United States of America. Oh, we think we're good. Security comes in many forms. Drinking water. So, why? Why does this happen? Why is it that in this great nation, all of us, 435 here and another 100 across the Capitol, why is it Flint, Michigan, Porterville, California, half a dozen other cities in California, no water or contaminated water? And just in December, it's reported that in about a half a dozen communities in the San Joaquin Valley of California, the uranium in the water has reached a level beyond that is allowed. Oh, that's okay. It's only going to be cancer. Uranium, fine. Flint, Michigan, Porterville, communities throughout the nation. Oh, Toledo, Ohio. I remember Toledo, Ohio last year shut down its water system because of contamination from an algae from the lake. America. Why? Why? Here's why. A sharp drop in government infrastructure spending. Oh, government infrastructure spending. Federal government infrastructure spending. 435 of us. This is our job. Oh, let's see, this is 2002. Somewhere around, oh, these are real dollars, disinflated or $325 billion. 2014, oh, that's 12 years later. $210 billion. That's what happens. That's what happens when you don't have water in Porterville. That's what happens when you have uranium and the inability to take it out because you can't afford the systems. And that's what happens in Flint, Michigan. Let's take another look at those numbers. Another way to look at it. Spending on clean water and drinking water infrastructure. In 2014 dollars, these are constant dollars across the way, 1973, 73. Is that Ronald Reagan? I think so. Actually, it was a little later. That wasn't Reagan. It's the end of the... So, what did we spend in 1973 in consistent dollars, 2014 dollars? We spent about $10 billion. Okay, 1990, we spent about $6 billion. Again, these are dollars all consistent for 2016 dollars. 1999, oh, we're down to about just under $4 billion. 2005, we get down to about $3.5. And 2016, bingo, $2 billion. You wonder why we have a D? You wonder why the water systems break? 240,000 water mains broke last year in the United States. You see the pictures of the sinkholes? That's not a geological issue. That's a water main issue. A water main is broken, washed out the street, washed out the community, and the houses fall into it. Not all of them, but that's basically it. 240,000 of those last year. So, what are we doing? Are we building new, high-quality water systems for our community? No, we're not. I'll tell you what we're doing. Over the next few years, we're going to spend $1 trillion in the next 20 years on rebuilding. That's $1 trillion, not $1 billion, $1 trillion on rebuilding our entire nuclear warfare system. Every bomb, new airplanes, new missiles, new intercontinental ballistic missiles, new submarines, $1 trillion. And this number competes with that $1 trillion. We make choices around here, folks. We make choices on how we're going to spend your tax money. We're going to spend it on bombs, nuclear bombs that go big in a big way, on new stealth bombers, new intercontinental ballistic missiles, new submarines, new dial-a-bomb, dial it up, goes big, dial it down, it goes small so that we can use it as a tactical nuclear weapon. Whoa. We're making choices here. I can go on for some time about this. I get pretty excited about it. I get pretty dismayed when I'm in Brussels, as I was last week, returning from the Gulf states, Oman, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Bahrain, looking at what's going on there. And I'll tell you what I saw there. I saw enormous problems. But I also saw modern infrastructure. Go to Brussels. Look at their airport. Then go to an American airport. Water. Water. Flint, Michigan, water. State of Michigan, United States of America, and that's the water that 100,000 Americans are forced to drink. We got a Clean Water Act. We've got the laws in place to build our water systems. So what do? Well, I guess we'd rather rebuild the B-61 nuclear bomb rather than building a water system for Americans, for the security of 100,000 people. I live a long way from Flint, Michigan, but the guy I'm going to call on, that's his home. That's where he was raised. Those are the people he represents. Dan Kildee, you have been on this issue for weeks and months. You have been sounding the alarm. You have been calling us out. You have been calling us out, all 435 of us, and the Senate, and the administration, and you've been calling us out, and you are doing the work of securing the safety of the people in your community. Please join me, Dan Kildee, Michigan.
Well, first of all, let me thank my friend, Mr. Garamendi, not just for that introduction and for his comments about my hometown, but for his leadership on this issue. This is the critical issue that really determines whether we're competitive as a nation, but it goes beyond competitiveness. It's the issue that will determine whether we have national security, true national security, but it goes beyond national security. Sometimes it's a matter of life and death. Sometimes it's really a matter of health. And in my hometown, the issue of infrastructure, of failed infrastructure, and in particularly of the state of Michigan and their failure to manage infrastructure, let alone reinvest in it, potentially will affect not just 100,000 people, all of the citizens there, but most importantly, will affect the trajectory of the lives of 9,000 children under the age of 6 who for the last year and a half have been drinking water that has elevated lead levels well beyond what normally would be required in order to take drastic action to correct the problem. And it was largely overlooked because a failed philosophy of government in the state of Michigan that puts short-term interest, short-term dollars and cents measures of success ahead of not just long-term investment, but ahead of the lives of children has resulted in this terrible tragedy. And I'll just take a moment to tell you what happened and to support the efforts of my friend Mr. Garamendi in continuing to raise this question. I mean, the letter grade graph that he showed regarding clean drinking water showed in the aggregate a grade of D. In Flint, it was an F. It was a failing grade. So the failure to invest in infrastructure, particularly urban infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, led to significant economic difficulty in my hometown of Flint. The failure of the state to support cities, and in fact they cut direct support to cities, resulted in my hometown going into financial stress. The state then appointed a receiver to take over the city. Rather than provide support, rather than rebuild, appointed a receiver, a financial manager, to go in with one tool and one tool only, and that was a scalpel, to cut the budget of a city that was really begging for investment. Instead of investment, more cuts. One of the cuts was for a temporary period of time until a regional pipeline to Lake Huron was completed to draw drinking water from the Flint River, which for decades functioned as an open industrial sewer. In the state of Michigan, where we have the world's greatest source of surface water, fresh water, there was a decision to use the Flint River. But because of our aging infrastructure, old infrastructure, lots of lead pipes, including thousands and thousands of lead service lines to homes, and the failure of the state to manage this process and treat the water effectively, highly corrosive water leached lead into the drinking water, and 100,000 people have been subjected to elevated lead levels, thousands of children potentially affected. And the sad story here is that it all could easily have been prevented with just a little bit of investment, better management of the infrastructure. But we take infrastructure, we take water infrastructure for granted, as if all we have to do is turn on the faucet and the water will appear. No, it takes investment. It takes money. It takes resources. And in this case, the state's failure has resulted in something that we hope is not repeated across this country. But without investment, there will be more Flint, Michigans. So what we need now is to call upon the state particularly to make the kind of investment in Flint to make it right. As I said, 9,000 children in the city of Flint under the age of 6, substantially elevated lead levels in their water that showed up in their blood in tests done by a courageous pediatrician, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, who was one of the people who blew the whistle on this. So now we have a crisis in Flint. It's a loss of faith in government, but it's a crisis because this city is really at risk. And we need significant investment to make it right. That investment would come in the form of replacement, long overdue replacement of those lead service lines, that lead piping that is outdated, obsolete, and dangerous. But because of the failure to deal with this when it was a less expensive investment, we now have, I think, a very important moral responsibility that the state of Michigan has to take care of the unique needs that these children will face as they go through their developmental stages. We need early childhood education for all of them. We need good nutritional programming, not just to make it available, to ensure they have good nutrition. We need additional help in the schools. We need behavioral support. There are consequences. There are human consequences to this failure. It's not just that the water looks bad, smells bad, tastes bad. It's unhealthy. And here's a case that, again, I hope Flint's experience can be a lesson for the rest of the country. Because the way our state treated the people of Flint was as if they didn't matter, and allowed this infrastructure to atrophy, allowed the city to atrophy, didn't support redevelopment, didn't support even the basic need of $140 a day to provide corrosion control treatment in this aging water system. All of that could have prevented this terrible tragedy, but they didn't do it. And so now the state of Michigan bears the principal responsibility. Now, I'm doing everything I can to get federal help for this, but the state of Michigan bears the principal responsibility. And as far as I'm concerned, it's up to them to make it right. And to close, and then I'll turn it back to my friend, the message that he has been bringing to this Congress when it comes to this question of infrastructure, that Flint proves, is that it matters what we do here. It matters what we do in this House. The fact that we have known as a nation for a long time that if we're going to be safe, if we're going to be competitive, if we're going to be healthy, we have to invest in that which we take for granted. I mean, think about it. Water. Drinkable water. Most people in this room, most people in America never give it a second thought. Just turn on the faucet and it's there. And it's literally what we depend upon for our very lives. And in Flint, Michigan, because of this terrible failure, not only was it not safe, but we poisoned 9,000 children as a result. There are consequences to what we do here, and there are consequences to what we don't do here. And so for those members who have expressed their sympathy, I appreciate that. I sincerely do. But the children of Flint, the people of Flint, and frankly, the people of Porterville and everywhere else need more than sympathy. We need investment. We need this Congress and this country to step up and do what's right and invest in our own future. Because if we don't, as you can tell, there are consequences. Thank you for your leadership on this.
Mr. Kildee, thank you so very much, and for your work that you're doing, sounding the alarm and driving all of us. I know you did this morning in our caucus. You alerted us to it. You motivated us. And in fact, I'm talking about it tonight because of your motivation that you gave to me and to my colleagues, to our colleagues this morning. You spoke here a little bit about the human consequences. And I'd like you to take another run around this on how we bear, the community of America, and more specifically Michigan, bear the responsibility of caring for, addressing the human problem that now exists.
So thank you. And I thank you for that question, because that's really the core of what we're dealing with right now. We need a lot of help in Flint. This could have been avoided. But now that this has occurred, there's some work we need to do to fix the pipes. There's some work we need to do to make sure that the emergency needs are met, temporary water. But the real need is this human need. Lead exposure, lead is a neurotoxin. It affects development of the brain. And the people, the citizens who are most at risk are those children who are still in those early developmental stages, particularly children age 6 and under. I mean, literally, children drinking formula made with this water will have the trajectory of their lives potentially affected. Now, the thing that I think is important to keep in mind, first of all, Flint is a tough town. We can live through this, we can get through this, we can succeed, but we're going to need resources. We need resources really to come from the people who did this to us, which is the state government with, I think, a completely bankrupt philosophy that basically says you're on your own. Well, you're not on your own when it comes to drinking water. We all expect drinking water to be clean, and we have every right to expect that. It's a human right. But now what we need, and what is morally, I think, required, is to wrap our arms around these kids. We know that when it comes to brain development and challenges that kids might face, whether it's from a developmental question from some other source or derived from lead exposure, that the more we do to help those children develop as early as possible, the better they'll do in the long term. So I'll have legislation that I'll introduce this week that puts federal support up and requires the state of Michigan to come up with its share, because they did this, that would expand Head Start, early Head Start, give those kids that early opportunity to expand their minds, that would get the nutritional support, because we know that good food, nutritious food, milk, for example, is very helpful in getting kids through lead exposure with minimal impact. Now, it's only to mitigate the damage and to help these kids overcome. But what we need to do now as a community is what we would do for any child facing a developmental challenge. So it's early childhood education, it's nutritional support, it's a school nurse, for example. I mean, we have gone so far in this country where we don't even fund the basics, which we all grew up with. I mean, we all had the school nurse. You go to Flint, Michigan, it's a city of 100,000 people. You have one school nurse. After-school programming, enrichment opportunity. Most of the kids in my hometown, sadly, already have hurdles in front of them because of the misfortune of being born into poverty. and they don't have the kind of opportunities that many kids take for granted. Piano lessons, dance, art, after-school activities, gym time, a summer program, maybe for the older kids, a summer job. That's the kind of help that will be required in order to move these kids from where they were headed before this crisis occurred and what the trajectory of their lives looks like right now. So the point is, there are human consequences for the failure to do this right in the first place. And when we have a state government that failed these kids, they now have a moral obligation to step up and actually take care of their needs going forward.
If I might interrupt you for a moment. This morning you spoke of a young child that was interviewed. Would you please share that with the United States?
I will. And it was, I read this. It came from a writer from Detroit, a guy named Mitch Albom, whom most people know for having written a bestseller called Tuesdays with Morrie. Well, he came to Flint to interview some children, to talk to them about what this whole experience meant to him, meant to them, I should say. And this one young man said something which, in a very poignant way, in a really eloquent way, describes what exactly has happened in Flint. This little boy said that he was afraid that he wouldn't be smart now, that he wouldn't be smart. And it just occurred to me, what a terrible crime this is, that the failure of adults to manage the government in a way that concerns the life of a child into account, that looks only at the balance sheet, only at a quarterly earnings statement. Maybe the longest term that they look at is an annual financial report. Wouldn't consider the fact that the result would be to have a young 8 or 9-year-old boy say to himself, I'm afraid I won't be smart. What does that do to that kid's hopes for himself? I mean, whether the cognitive, behavioral, developmental impact of lead would have any substantial effect on him or her, the kids that are in Flint, the fact that the action or the lack of action by their government gives them doubt about their own future, doubt about their own capacity, it's just heartbreaking.
Mr. Kildee, thank you very, very much. I'm afraid I won't be smart enough. I wonder if we should ask ourselves if we are smart enough. Are we smart enough? 435 of us, facing a myriad of questions around this world, and some of them in our own hometowns. Are we smart enough? Yield back.
The gentleman yields back.